afternoon, and thank you all for joining us on Wine Wednesday. This is the Thanksgiving Farm edition, so we're joined by two wonderful folks who I'd like to bring up straight away, Maureen and Doug Heimbuch from Thanksgiving Farm Winery in Harwood, Anne Arundel County. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks so much for being here. So you've been around since when? When was the winery founded?
2006, we got our commercial licenses.
Which means that
since 1998.
Wow. Okay. So you had grapes for a while before then.
Yeah, it was basically a hobby that got out of control.
We hear that story a lot. It's an expensive hobby, and so at some point you decide I should start selling this stuff.
Exactly.
You were the first winery in Anne Arundel County that we have a record of.
We are the first commercial winery in Anne Arundel County.
So forging a new path like that is not easy. Tell us what that process was like and how long it took. And do you have any fond memories, or are they all gruesome?
At this point, they're all fond. It was a challenge. We were the first winery, so we were breaking new ground. But we were blessed with a lot of support from folks in the government. Our former councilman, Ed Riley, who's now a state senator, was a big proponent of the winery and helped us every step of the way. We got tremendous support from Lisa Barge, an agricultural economic development group. We have a conservation easement on the farm with the county, and Barbara Polito, who heads up that program, worked with us to make sure there was no conflicts with the county, with our ag easement, with having the winery and having people here from the public. And you helped us understand the industry. We met you early on in the process. And it took about 2 years to get through the county building permit process, Doug, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And, we just worked through it. We do permitting for a living, so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It took time, and we worked through it with the county.
When you say that you do permitting, what do you do? How does that fit in?
We have day jobs that are solely going away, but I'm a lawyer, so I've done environmental permitting and local land use permitting for a living, so it wasn't that out of the ordinary for us. And Doug has done support work on permitting as well over the years, so we're good with regs and good with putting permit applications together. So,
do you find that translated and has that legal and kind of regulatory background been helpful in this business?
Very much so, because it's a regulated industry.
I know that you've heard me describe it and joke about it, that there's kind of the nuclear regulation and then there's alcohol in terms of some of the strictest regulated entities. And nuclear has had meltdowns and we had prohibition. So we both have had bad days at some point. So tell us a little bit about your vineyards and your vines and what you're growing and how you decided to plant what you did.
Okay. Yeah, so our vineyards are planted exclusively to Bordeaux red varieties. And that's because that's what Maureen and I like to drink. So we planted with the Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Cab Sauvignon, and Petit Verdot. We have no white varieties. And when we got started planting, we were aware that the soils in this part of Anne Arundel County are very erodible and had been eroded heavily due to agriculture historically. Our site is very, has a lot of topography, a lot of slopes, which is good and bad. It's good because we don't have standing water, and grapevines don't like to have wet feet. So the hillsides are good to prevent standing water. But if they're not managed well, they can induce quite a bit of erosion during heavy rainfall events. So before we started planting, we contacted the Soil Conservation District in Anne Arundel County, and they were very, very helpful. Came out and helped us lay out the patterns of the trellis work so that the trellises run parallel to the contours of dominant slopes. So if you were to look at our vineyards from an aerial photo, it almost looks like a herringbone pattern because the slopes, the topography here is very variable. So we wanted to protect the soil. So we planted in a way that there are always permanent grassy strips to intercept water that's running downhill. And that helps reduce the velocity of the water and also trap soil particles. So, so that's kind of, those were some of the guiding principles when we got started planting, and we've continued to do it that way.
So you don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to plant a vineyard and throw some vines on a hill.
Well, actually we did do that, but
the first time you did that.
Right. And that first planting, experimental planting, was with hybrid, French-American hybrid grapes, which grew fairly well and made some nice wines, but it just wasn't what we preferred. So ultimately we pulled those out and replaced them with the Bordeaux red varieties.
So it's interesting that well, it's not unique that you would plant varieties that you like to drink. Right, I hear that a lot. That what did you plant? Well, I planted things that I enjoy on a regular basis, and if I'm gonna, especially if it's a hobby growing out of control, when you're first making wine, you're making things that you'd want to drink. But you said something interesting. You planted no white varieties. Why not?
We're a very small operation. It's a mom and pop shop, and you're looking at mom and pop, and we just didn't think we could do well with too many different things. So we decided to stay very focused. What
I love most about the story is, very popular wine of yours happens to be white, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so we'll talk about how a winery that is an estate winery, meaning you're using all of your own fruit, how you plant only red grapes and make white wine. So I'm excited to talk about that once we get to that. So it sounds like you're coming into this with a lot of curiosity and education about the soil, and trying to plant your vines in a way that is productive for the land. Tell me about how you manage other things. Pest control. We're in a very humid climate, so especially in Anne Arundel County, as you're creeping towards southern Maryland, it's warmer and got some humidity from the bay.
Absolutely true. So in terms of pest management, there are several big categories. The first one we dealt with were the deer herds. Mm-hmm. Very large deer herds here, and they're happy to eat the vines as well as the fruit. So each of our vineyards, before we put them in, we put an 8-foot tall deer fence around the vineyard site, and with an 8-foot gate. And that's been 100% effective at keeping the deer out of our vineyards. So we've been able to remain friends with the deer. Otherwise, they would have been our enemies for sure.
Public enemy number one.
Exactly. Another thing that is always a problem, and you're alluding to it with the high humidity and temperatures in southern Maryland, are diseases, plant diseases mostly caused by fungal organisms. And when we first planted, we really weren't paying attention to that, and we had losses of hundreds of plants due to disease. And we spoke with Dave Myers, the extension agent, who has had a lot of experience with growing grapevines, and he put us on to a program that the University of Maryland was developing for controlling plant diseases, grapevine diseases. So thanks to his encouragement to look in that direction, we started to use the University of Maryland program, and it's been very effective, and it's allowed us to keep our vines quite healthy. So there are those disease pests that we manage now very actively. And then another type of pest are avian pests, birds. And we were originally using a bird deterrent system that relies on digitally recorded bird distress calls to scare away birds. And that was working pretty well until we were invaded by some huge flocks of robins one year. And they took out about maybe a quarter to a third of all of our Merlot fruit. So we knew we had to do something else. And we had a conversation with Tom Shelton, who is the owner and winemaker at Bordelot Vineyards and Winery. And he was saying that he had trouble with birds as well and had been using the bird distress system and then tried using bird netting in addition and found it was very effective. So based on his recommendation, we decided to put a bird netting. It's quite expensive, but it's been very effective. So those are three of the main types of pests that we have to manage. And we've gotten assistance and recommendations from county extension people and from fellow vineyard operators. And that's been very helpful to us.
I've heard for years about, and it doesn't happen every year, but if you do get that random flock of migrating birds that happens to spot your vineyard or land there just by chance, it can be completely devastating. And I don't think most wine lovers realize that an entire crop of grapes can be decimated in a matter of hours or less by just an errant flock of birds.
Yeah.
Yum. Well, and thanks for the deer. I've heard of many other wineries that specialize in venison stew. I guess better that you're able to make friends with them. So you've been around for a while. So we in the industry, we've had a couple of segments of growth or phases of growth, and you kind of came in that second wave in the early 2000s to mid 2000s when the laws were really being turned upside down. We were making big progress in Annapolis and in the counties. How have the laws affected you? And with your legal background, I'm sure you've probably got additional recommendations for us to focus on. But what have been the big changes in your mind?
Well, when we first got started, we didn't even know if we were going to bother with the tasting room because the laws were such that we could sell 1 quart per variety per customer per year.
Right.
And that would have made no sense and been impossible to try and comply with. And then the laws changed, thanks to your good work and others on behalf of the industry, so that we can now have a tasting room and on-site sales, which have been very helpful in terms of developing a client base and giving our wines additional exposure. So that was one really major change that made a huge difference right from the get-go. And that was in place by the time we had the new building built and the tasting room ready to go. And then there's the recent change that happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that has allowed wineries to do additional things and to, if they so choose, to bring in additional grapes. And that's been very helpful. So we think the industry, and through your good efforts, Kevin, has been very successful in getting positive legislative changes brought into bear. The Comptroller's office has been wonderful to work with. The Comptroller himself, Lou Berman, the rest of the permitting staff there have been super easy to work with whenever we've needed anything.
It's funny because I play music throughout the house, and we've got a Bluetooth speaker, and it randomly pulled up the testimony from the Senate floor debate over the Maryland Winery Modernization Act from 2010, just over the weekend. So I'm listening to music, and my wife and kids and I are listening to music, and then all of a sudden you hear Mike Miller pounding his gavel and moving on to the Senate bill. And the discussion about it's funny, all that work that led up to the passage of that bill, the bill almost died at the last minute because a certain set of senators were trying to insert direct shipping onto our bill. I don't know if you remember that. And it was just utter chaos. I remember Pat Roddy, our attorney, and Rob DeFord, our government affairs chair from Bordy, and others going mad. So I know you were on some of those calls because we had to get that bill passed. And then finally the next year direct shipping was passed, which was great. But you bring that up. No one believes us that just 10 years ago, you couldn't have a table or a chair in your tasting room. You couldn't offer a glass of wine to anyone. You couldn't offer a sample without a guided tour. You could only sell, as you said, 1 liter or 1 quart?
Quart
per person, per brand, per year. I mean, why? You know, it makes no sense. So we've come a long way. So I'm glad that those have been helpful.
Helpful.
And before we get to trying some wines, I'd love to find out what you have done during COVID. How have you adapted? Because everybody's had to adapt. You've got a beautiful tasting room, but what's the full capacity?
We are not using our tasting room at all at this point. Everything is outside.
But how big is the taste? What's the usual capacity?
10
Yeah.
people. 10
So,
people.
you know,
10 people where we're sitting now.
so when you're cut to 25% or outlawed entirely, it's made things difficult. So how have you adapted to that?
Well, we have outside seating, and we've also, thanks to Doug's good creativity, come up with what we call a tasting to
Good to see.
go kit.
Let's zoom in on that.
And through the governor's good graces, we're able to sell that for off-site consumption or on-site consumption. And we've used that in lieu of doing poured tastings. We have each of the 6 wines that we're pouring at the present time, and it comes with 5-ounce bottles of each of those wines with a little guide. And each of the bottles has a colored dot. There's a colored dot on the guide that coincides with the color on the bottle, and it provides a brief explanation of the wine so that neither we nor our tasting room team have to spend an undue amount of time up close and personal where there's any potential for risk to our customers and or to our staff. So we think we found a way to work around providing a safe environment and allowing people to taste our wine before they purchase.
That's a great way to do it. Can they reserve it in advance and just pick it up, or must they walk in and transact?
No, they can order online. We can send them an invoice online that they can pay online.
Oh, great.
And we can have their order, whatever it may be, bottles of wine or the tasting kit ready for them. And we can take it out to their car for them, or they can pick it up curbside.
We have walk-ins. We make up the tasting kits to go for them when they come in.
That's great. I was going to ask, what's the feedback been?
The feedback has been incredibly positive. People think it's novel, they think it's cute, they think it's fun, and it lets them do a tasting either here. And we've had a lot of people who have brought them home if they have small kids or something and they're looking for something to do cooped up in the house, and they get to do a wine tasting, they get to feel safe, and they've really enjoyed it. We had people give them as Christmas gifts this year.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. So it's kind of a trade question, but do you find, I've always associated the act of tasting as frankly a sales pitch. You know, you're trying to get someone trying to inure your wines to someone and hopefully land a sale out of it. How do you find sales connected to your tasting kits, or is the tasting kit the sale in your mind?
In my mind, the tasting kit is a sale, but it has allowed, I think, people who might be reluctant, who've never had our wines, to buy a bottle of wine sight unseen, taste without having tasted it.
Right.
Yeah, may I just add to
Absolutely.
that? Our experience this fall, and our sales were actually not too bad this fall. When customers came in, usually they'll buy a tasting kit to start, and more often than not, a customer group, 2 or 3 people sitting at a table, will end up buying 2 or 3 bottles on the way out. So I think still the tasting kit is still doing what we used to do when we were pouring by hand and talking to the customer about each wine.
I think that's great. And what a unique way to get all of your wines, or at least 6 of your wines, in front of people. Because I know when I taste wines in a winery, I will, if there's the ability to select, I will select things I think I like, which is unfortunate because I'm missing out on beautiful wines that I probably will also like, but maybe we're not comfortable with. So Are these all of the wines you have available now, or do you?
These wines, yes, these are the wines that we have available for sale in the tasting room today.
Gotcha. So the tasting flight can change if your wines evolve, if you have something new coming in.
Correct, and it in fact did that last year.
Okay.
Beginning of the year, we had some wines we ended up selling out, so we substituted other wines for it. We changed the menu for the tasting kit.
Great. Yeah.
And it hasn't changed as much from our tasting process when we were doing live tastings, because we always had a fixed flight of 5 or 6 wines that was on the tasting.
Do you think that you will continue offering a tasting kit if and when COVID evaporates and everything's back to normal?
Yeah.
So my take on it, Kevin, is that I would like to see us continue with it. One of the other things we've done with COVID with our outdoor seating, we have 10 tables outside. Each seats 4 to 6 people. So during COVID in the fall, we had 2 seatings, one from 12 to 2 and one from 3 to 5. Reservations were highly recommended.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew who was coming. We almost always filled up the seats. We had an hour in between seatings to sanitize for the next group. It was so civilized. And I just liked it. If we could continue with that model, I would stick with it.
You know, I hear from a good number of wineries that I think will not go back to offering tastings. They'll go back to offering flights. So you can come in and pick A, B, or C, and A includes these 5 wines or that. But the idea of bellying up to the wine tasting bar and having to serve multiple people at a time and which wine are you on and this and that, it's a much less, now it's a much more interactive experience and a controlled experience.
It's a much more controlled experience. I agree.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So kudos to you and that tasting kit. It looks like that is a box a carrier you need to hand assemble. So you've probably got an assembly line putting those together.
We found a manufacturer who manufactures them to any dimension. So we figured out the dimensions of the bottles we wanted to use, sent the dimensions to the box manufacturer. He custom builds the kits for us, the carriers for it, and it just makes for a nice little handy kit.
Love it. Well, good work. Let's get to the fun stuff. I've got a comment here from Abby. The tasting kits look great. Available for delivery or pickup only. It sounds like it was pickup only.
Correct. We don't have a delivery service, and this isn't something we would be able to ship.
Yep. So get the to the winery, and but I mean, it sounds like you've made it streamlined. People can order and pay in advance and just pick it up, which is great. Right. Yeah. All right. So tell us which wine you'd like to start with, and talk us through these. Okay.
So we have 4 wines today that we want to talk about. And Kevin, you had mentioned that we have a white wine, although we have no white wine grapes here. So we thought we'd start with that one.
Perfect.
Marie, would you like to talk about that?
Sure. This is our Franc Blanc. This is the white juice from the red cab Franc grape that's been fermented off the skins. And while this may seem unusual, it's really not that different. Pinot Grigio comes from a red grape. Blanc de Blanc Champagne is from Chardonnay. Blanc de Noir Champagne is from Chardonnay, from Pinot Noir grapes. So making a white wine from a red wine grape is not that unusual. As far as we know, we were the first winery in the United States to make a white Cabernet Franc. We've since found out that there's another winery in the West Coast that's making a white Cabernet Franc. There's some wineries in the Chenin region of France that make white Cabernet Franc grapes, because that's a very popular grape in that region of France. And it has been, as you mentioned, very popular with our customers.
So it's a very interesting wine, and you may or may not have had it yet, Kevin. But it's people ask us, is it like a Chardonnay? And we say no. Is it like a Sauvignon Blanc? And we say no. It's just very different. It's the way we vent it. It's very soft, low acid. To me, the flavors. Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm gonna have to virtual cheers.
Thank you.
I love this wine. If I could just interrupt, I had an earlier rendition of this wine, and one of my favorite whites in Maryland, period. And that's saying a lot because it's a red, but it's a white. Yeah.
Yeah. So to my palate, I get flavors reminiscent of pear, apple, are the dominant fruits for me.
I would agree.
But
It varies from vintage to vintage, like all wines, and we find it goes nicely with cheese, seafood, shellfish.
Mm-hmm.
So my impression of it, and it's been about a year since I drank my last bottle of it, so I do need to come down and try some more. If I had my blinders on, I would guess that it was a light red wine.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have and there are some whites that present a little more tannin or viscosity or something like that based on how they're made or the variety itself or the oak that it was in. But this one, I mean, it's got all it's a white wine for red wine drinkers is how I've described it to friends. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we heard that from customers as well.
Well, good work, because it's definitely a favorite. So this one gets my thumbs up award.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, now we want to move to our 2015 vintage, sort of the wines that are our focus. So this is our Meritage line and also our Farmhouse Red. So in 2015, we entered these three wines in the International Eastern Wine Competition, and the Meritage, the Reserve Meritage, both got a silver medal, and Farmhouse Red got a gold medal. And we're very pleased with that because it's showing Maryland wines in the context of wineries up and down the coast, as well as South America and Europe and the eastern parts of Canada. So we just, it's not a local competition,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to bring back some awards for the state, we're really happy to have it happen.
That's great. So tell us which order would you like to go in? You want to start with the farmhouse?
Actually, I think we'll start with the straight Meritage, and while I'm pouring, Maureen's going to explain to you how we decide on our blend each year.
Our Meritage is a targeted blend. Doug ferments each of the varieties separately through primary and secondary fermentation. And after secondary fermentation is over and he's racked the wine a couple of times, he'll bring a sample jar back to the house from each of the tanks. So we'll sit at the dining room table with maybe two sample jars of Merlot, 1 or 2 sample jars of Cab Franc, 1 sample jar of Cab Sauvignon, and 1 or 2 sample jars of Petit Verdot, and a couple of our favorite bottles of Bordeaux. And then we try all different blends of the wine until we get something that we think is going in the direction of the Bordeaux standards that we have on the table. The next weekend, we repeat the experiment with the top 2 or 3 contenders, and then Doug comes down and does the big blend.
So cheers, Kevin. I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. I was just lamenting that I'm not in the room with you drinking wine.
As are we.
Yeah.
So it's got to happen again soon. So is the process of blending the same across your wines, or does each wine get a different technique?
Great question. Lead up to the next point. So when we make our Meritage, we just do one blend for the Meritage.
Okay.
And in some years, we have excess of 1 or 2 varieties that, if we put into the Meritage, would give us a wine that didn't remind us anymore of Bordeaux standard. So, for example, in this year, we ended up with too much Merlot, too much Cab Franc, a little bit too much Petit Verdot. We were trying to find a targeted blend in terms of percentages of the grapes of the 4 different wines, and we had some leftovers. So each year, after we've made the blend for the Meritage, we put all the leftovers into what we call Farmhouse Red. So it's the same wine that went into the Meritage, it's just a different blend. Now the other difference is, when we make the Meritage, we put roughly half of it into brand new French oak barrels, and that we label as our reserve wine. So the brand new French oak barrels are quite expensive, and the first use gives the wine a certain richness that a barrel that has already been used doesn't give the wine. The rest of the Meritage blend we put into barrels that we had already used 1 year to make the reserve wine. So this wine came out of the same tank as this wine. The only difference is the barrel treatment. And when we do our tastings with our customers or in the tasting kit, we always explain that to the customers, and it makes a very interesting tasting to do side by side wine that came out of the same tank, and the only difference is the barrel treatment. And then the Farmhouse Red, which was our leftovers, we age in oak barrels that we had already used for 2 years. So we only ever buy brand new barrels, but we get 3 years of use out of each barrel. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the Farmhouse Red, which was the leftovers, aged in 2-year-old barrels, won the gold medal. We're happy with it. It makes no difference to us.
Well, and what do you think, if you were a judge tasting these wines blind, what would draw them to the Farmhouse Red over the Meritage?
It's softer. I think
Yeah.
if you're not used to drinking French wines, which have a lot of oak in them, a lot of oak tannins, red wines. Bordeaux, well, I think all French. I think Rhone wines have a lot of oak in it. Well, true. Bordeaux, which are heavily oaked. It may be off-putting to some palates, but who knows? It could be what they tasted before the wine.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, and you've tasted many things blind, and I've judged in competitions, and it's objective as it can be, but every once in a while there's a wine, for whatever reason or circumstance it might have been presented, just sings, and so that's interesting, and so 2 years, or it's in 2-year-old barrels, or barrels that have been used twice.
Correct.
So the barrels have been trained by then.
Right.
So
go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask. So with your reserve, I always wonder what the reserve means to you. When did you make your first reserve, and how did you know it was a reserve?
Well, I think what happened, and this might be revisionist history, is Maureen and I have taken a couple of research trips to Bordeaux, and in one of them we spoke with one of the chateau operators, and their barrel cellars are enormous. I mean, it appeared to be the size of a football field. It was just huge. And every year they use 100% brand new French oak barrels. This is a very high-end chateau. And we found that was the case at another chateau on that trip as well. So we thought, there must be something to it. They wouldn't be spending all that extra money on the new barrels each year unless it really made a difference. So we wanted to do the experiment. And we found that the difference between the brand new French oak barrel and a barrel that had already been used for a year, it's an amazing difference. So we just stuck with it. And we just decided to use the term reserve, which has no particular meaning in U.S. wine labeling. So we just use that to communicate to our customers that that's the wine that got the brand new French oak barrels.
And as you mentioned, it's the same blend per se.
It was exactly the same wine. It came out of the same tank.
Same wine as it was. So it's really the treatment. Do you think because it's got the brand new French oak barrels that you think it will age longer?
I think it probably will hold up longer in the bottle. Yep. I think the rate limiting step, as is often the case for red wine, is the cork. I think that these red wines anyway, have enough tannins. The acidity is nice. I think they'll hold up for decades, if the cork holds up for decades.
The cork allows it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I showed you right beforehand that I'm still clinging to a bottle or two of your 2006 and 2007.
Well, great, thank you.
Thank you.
So I forget which one it was that I emailed you about over the holidays, but there was
That was a 7.
The
it was
seven.
a 7. Okay, so then this may be the actual last bottle of the 2007. It was beautiful, and it had life in it, and it would continue going. So to think that a wine is 13 years old and still had freshness, I shouldn't be, but I'm always still amazed that you've got this organic product that can age like that and not spoil. Do you use the same cork across all your bottles?
We since that 2007, we changed our cork purveyor. So we're using what's called the technical cork now. So it's made from, I'll show you one. It's made from natural cork. Natural cork has one serious issue that gave us trouble. It sometimes contains a compound called TCA, and TCA causes cork taint in the wine. And if you've ever had a wine that's cork tainted, it kind of smells like a wet dog or an old wash rag, and it makes the wine completely unpalatable. And the cork manufacturers at the time were saying that the best they could do is generally provide cork that was 99% TCA free. So 1 in every 100 corks, you'd have spoiled wine. And that did happen to us on several occasions. So these new technical corks, the manufacturer takes natural cork, shreds it, treats it under extreme temperature and pressure conditions with CO2 to remove all the TCA, and then reassembles the cork with food grade adhesive under great pressure, and warranties the cork, these particular corks, that they'll retain their resiliency for 10 years. And we've had no trouble at all with TCA with these new corks.
Not a single trouble. I've heard wineries get bad batches of corks where it's not 1 in 100. It's cases upon cases upon cases at a time.
Yep.
that are flawed. So that's great to hear that you've had no issues.
Yeah, we've been using these now for
12, 13?
5, 10, almost 10 years now.
Yeah, because we had a lot of issues with wine in the tasting room. I guess it was when we were selling the 2009 that we had a lot of issues.
So you've shown us 4 wines. What are the other 2, just by chance, that are in your tasting pack?
So what's in the tasting pack right now are the 2014 vintage red wines. Okay. And we're just about finished with those, and we're going to be bringing forward the 2015 later this year. So the 2015 actually aren't available for sale this time, but they will be shortly.
So this is an exclusive preview.
It is. And also in the tasting kit, Kevin, we have the dessert wine made from Petit Verdot.
Cleverly labeled dessert to let everybody know right up front. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that as well. It's a great. I love Petit Verdot, and that's a great use of it. I didn't ask you, and I should ask you, what are the prices of the wines you showed us? The Franc Blanc downward.
The Franc Blanc we retail for $24.95. These 3 wines, because
you can talk about the 14s, yeah.
Oh, the 14s, the Reserve Meritage and the Straight Meritage are $29.95. The dessert wine is $24.95. And the other in the kit, we also have a white wine from our second label, which we call Tohi brand, and it's made from grapes that we source from off-site. And under the new winery regulations, our understanding is that we're required to have 51% of the fruit come from Maryland. Historically, it's been 100% for us, but with the new law, we have some certainty rather than it just being up to the Secretary of Agriculture each year to make a determination. So with the new sense of certainty, we decided to start a new brand under our license. So we have a Towhee brand now, and we're making a white Meritage that is made from Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon that we get as juice from South Africa and Chile in the spring, which also allows us to use our fermentation equipment twice a year instead of once.
That's great. So you're getting juice. You said Semillon and
Can you repeat that question?
what were those varieties again? Semillon and
Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon.
that's
which
great.
are the three traditional Bordeaux Blanc
Right.
varieties.
Sticking with Bordeaux. I like it.
We are.
We are. That's something else we fell in love with on our last research trip to Bordeaux.
is the Bordeaux Blanc wines. They're just lovely.
I was going to say one of my favorite American Bordeaux whites, which I don't think is even legal to say, but American whites made from Bordeaux white varieties is from L'Ecole Winery in Washington State. They make a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend, which is gorgeous. Gorgeous. So I'm anxious to try the Towhee. Will the Towhee be one wine, or will you have additional wines?
We will have additional wines. We're thinking of bringing out a Provence-style dry rosé under the Towhee brand.
Great. Well, listen, it's been great chatting with you. What else would you like to cover with so our audience can get to know you better? Or did we cover it?
I think we pretty much covered it. We are still trying to maintain as much of a personal touch with the social distancing as we can with customers when they're here, with customers and guests when they're here. We still try to learn everybody's name and make them feel welcome. And I guess that's about it.
Well, we got to get people out to or encourage people to go online, order those tasting kits. And what's the price of the tasting kits?
It's $40 plus tax.
$40 plus tax for 5 ounces of 6 different wines. So that's great. I mean, that's I love that. So I will be signing up for that. So thrilled to have you on after so long, and really appreciate you coming on.
And Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for this opportunity, and also thank you for your leadership in the industry and all the help you've given to move the industry as far forward as it has.
I appreciate that. It is a group effort, but I'm happy to hear that you've benefited from it, and onward. There's more to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
Cheers. And thanks everybody for tuning in. My final pitch is to check out marylandwine.com/explorer for a new wine club that we've started. So you will be learning about some brand new wines that you've never heard of, and there will be wines from all across the state included in this club, the different shipments throughout the year. The one hitch, you have to be a Marylander, so it's our best kept secret, or at least you have to live in Maryland. You don't necessarily need to be a Marylander. With that, just wanted to thank everybody, and Carrie, thank you as well. Thanks for all your support. And with that, we're going to get back to the rest of the world. I hear there's some news on right now. So thanks, everybody. Cheers.